In 1982, Greyhound Lines suffered devastating losses in a fare war initiated by Trailways, a war which had its beginnings in a wage freeze granted to Trailways by the Amalgamated Transit Union. Caught in a competitive bind, Greyhound Lines opened its books to the ATU and petitioned the union for desperately needed wage relief. The union refused, turning a deaf ear to the company's pleas. Over the course of the next 18 months, the company continued its appeals to the union, documenting and redocumenting Greyhound's mounting labor costs. All relief was denied, however, and all avenues of competitive pricing closed. By September 1983, when formal negotiations began on a new 3-year contract, Greyhound Lines' economic outlook had so worsened that the company had gone beyond the point where mere wage relief would suffice. Greyhound had to draw a new battle line. Now, the issue was parity. The ATU flatly refused to deal with the parity issue. In the words of union negotiators, "We're not here to discuss wage givebacks, only to determine the extent of wage hikes." On November 3rd, 1983, at 12:01 a.m., 12,700 Greyhound employees walked off their jobs. The strike would eventually erupt into recrimination and violence. The strike lasted 47 days. This film is a chronicle of the events that took place in the weeks and months leading up to the strike, of the actions taken by the company and the union during the strike, and the reaction of the national news media to the Greyhound Line strike situation. This is the story of Operation Sunrise. Negotiations between the company and the ATU Council began September 14, 1983 in Scottsdale. Greyhound's management team had formulated its 1983 labor strategy months earlier, and a contingency plan, Operation Sunrise, was in place to operate the company if the union called for a walkout. In the words of Greyhound Corporation Chairman John Teets, "The ultimate weapon of the union is to strike. The ultimate weapon of management is to operate the company during a strike." Although all parties hoped a long and costly strike could be avoided, negotiations sputtered as the union leadership refused to deal realistically with the key economic issues that confronted the company.
We'll talk to them, but it's got to be with reason, and parity is not the theme that we intend to live by or negotiate by.
In 1982, Greyhound Lines suffered an operating loss of over $16 million during a fare war initiated by Trailways and taken up by many other carriers. Although load factors were very high during the fare war, Greyhound's 30 to 50% higher wage rates proved devastating to profits. Greyhound asked the ATU during the fare war for wage relief. The union refused. Competition from other bus companies wasn't the only economic problem faced by Greyhound. New low-cost airlines had taken to the skies, offering high-frequency bargain fare travel on routes that were the traditional domain of the intercity bus industry. These airlines were siphoning off passengers from both Greyhound and even the established major airlines. Labor costs became the story of the year in the transportation industry. And at Greyhound, labor cost parity was the key issue of the 1983 negotiations. On October 4th, a fact book, Greyhound Lines Today, was presented to the ATU Council and subsequently mailed to all Greyhound Lines employees. It clearly stated the company's need for parity with other Class 1 bus companies. The union objected to the company's decision to communicate directly with the rank and file, a decision made by John Teets. He insisted throughout the negotiations that an ATU member is first of all a Greyhound employee. Angered by Greyhound's taking the offensive and adamant on the parity issue, union negotiators walked out of the talks. With negotiations stalled and the strike deadline near, ads were placed in major newspapers to recruit replacement drivers and other personnel. On October 17th, the company dramatized its case for parity in a videotape that was shown to most Greyhound Lines employees in the United States and Canada.
Fact number 3. Greyhound's ATU labor cost is anywhere from 30% to 50% higher than other Class 1 carriers. These additional labor costs have to be figured into every single pricing decision we make, from regular route fares to charter bids. This means higher prices than our competitors on some routes or much lower profits.
So what you're saying is, if we get the price low enough, people would rather ride with us.
Right, right.
Okay, I'll buy that. So cut the fare.
You cut the fare, you go broke.
How come the other guys don't go broke?
Because they don't pay the higher wages and benefits that Greyhound does. Think about it.
We need parity. If our company can't achieve parity of labor costs with our principal competitors in the bus industry, we are going to shrink and wither and eventually may die. The 1983 union negotiations are not a win-lose situation in which concessions on one side mean a victory for the other side. They are a win-win situation in which first prize for both management and labor is to keep our company healthy and keep our jobs.
Negotiations continued on an on-again, off-again basis as the ATU leadership refused to consider parity. At Greyhound headquarters in Phoenix, preparations for a strike accelerated. A tactical command center was set up to communicate with supervisors and employees in the field. And the public relations staff and equipment were mobilized to handle over 8,000 calls from radio, television, and print reporters. In Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, Atlanta, San Francisco, and New York, driver training schools began.
On midnight tonight, November 2nd, the ATU will take Greyhound employees out on strike. The leadership, through the either lack of understanding of the proposed contract or the possible misunderstanding of the seriousness of what we're doing, rejected our contract offer. On October 31st, 1983, we presented to the union leadership our proposal. We said at that time we would be more than happy to extend the contract that we presently have until the employees of Greyhound Lines had the opportunity to review that proposal and vote on it. The union leadership flatly refused. They have not had serious dialogue with us. Every time we say what's wrong with the contract, and we're saying we're talking about parity, and they say we don't want to discuss it.
The ATU leadership continued to refuse to let its members see the company's proposal or vote on their own destiny. So, taking the offensive, the company sent a copy of the offer to all Greyhound employees.
That proposal will be airmailed to Greyhound employees so they have the opportunity to review what they did not have the opportunity to vote on.
1 minute after midnight on November 3rd, the strike began.
Thousands of people are not going Greyhound tonight. They may not be going anywhere because workers walked off their jobs and under the picket lines today rather than accept a pay cut. Mara Walensky tells us the strike is not stopping management, however, from doing what it can to replace the striking workers.
Last year, the Greyhound Bus Company carried over 57 million people around this country. But this morning, they weren't carrying anyone.
On the first morning of the strike, a forecast of things to come occurred. Thousands of men and women crossed the union picket lines and applied for jobs with Greyhound Lines. More than 60,000 applications would be received before the strike ended.
For the second day, hundreds of job seekers came to the 42nd Street Port Authority bus terminal. As the strike against Greyhound entered its third day, more than 1,000 people passed their picket lines. for a chance to apply for a job as a bus driver, a ticket seller, maintenance worker, janitor, anything that might be available.
People on strike are upset that people are applying for these jobs.
I'm not concerned with that right now. I'm concerned about me. I have nothing to do with those other people. There's a job opening, and if I can get it, I want it.
It does upset me a little, but if they want to work, they should be here. You know, because times is hard out there. Real hard. This winter time is coming. It's going to be real cold winter this year.
I was recently laid off. I was working as a carpenter. And it doesn't bother me a bit to cross the picket line. I just thought I'd come down and check it out and see what I could do.
It's hard to find work, and this is an opportunity. I'm going to take it. So I'm going all the way for it.
That's the way the ball bounces, you know. It's a dog-eat-dog world now, and I've been unemployed since February.
What do you think about all these guys coming in here applying for your job?
This is about 20 years ago, and we could do something about it.
There could be violence aimed at the Greyhound bus company. Since the strike began yesterday, picketing has been peaceful, but bus drivers on strike say they will resort to violence if Greyhound goes ahead and hires non-union drivers.
Violence is inevitable in the long run. I'm not suggesting it or condoning it, but it will happen if people are shut out of their jobs after 20 and 30 years.
I'm not a violent person, but I have three people to support.
They all say the same thing. When a man drives out that driveway with his or her job, that there's going to be violence, that they're not going to do it. And it's their livelihood. And that's the only way they have to retaliate by violence. They're going to retaliate with violence. That's what the company's asking for. That's what the company's going to get.
Is that what you're hearing across the country?
All across the country.
On November 8th, this full-page ad, headlined "Greyhound Wants You to Know," stated Greyhound's need for parity, clearly and concisely. It ran in over 170 major newspapers across the country.
Some 12,000 employees of Greyhound's bus lines remain out on strike this evening. They're refusing to accept a work contract that could cut their salaries. The company has also taken action, though, in print. Mike Ayers is here with that. Mike?
Well, Greyhound Corporation today delivered messages to both its striking employees and to the American public. Two messages, in fact. One is in the form of a full-page advertisement printed in 150 newspapers today nationwide. The ad, which is reminiscent to the series of ads offered by the Phelps Dodge Corporation a couple of months ago explaining its argument in the copper strike, does the same for Greyhound. It compares the average Greyhound employee's salary to those of competitor employees, showing the Greyhound worker as the higher paid, even after the proposed pay cut. Greyhound Corporation Chairman John Teets says the company wants its customers to understand that a 9.5% salary cut was a last resort.
We would just be happy if we could keep what we had in our last contract. I don't think nobody here is really going out for a race. See what they've been advertising.
But you won't take concessions.
We're going to have to. It's just how much.
I hope we can hurry up and get this over with, because it's getting mighty cold out here.
On November 13th, Greyhound announced it would resume partial operation of its bus service on Thursday, November 17th. Newspaper ads appeared in over 170 markets, offering passengers an unprecedented half-price sale on tickets. It was a sober group that convened in the Tactical Command Center late Wednesday afternoon, less than 12 hours before the first bus was scheduled to roll. Chairman John Teets, in a conference call, polled every field location and asked two questions. Are you ready? Are you going to be able to run your buses? Later he would say, I needed to hear from each man personally. I needed to hear in each voice a total concurrence in an act that was clearly the opening salvo in an economic war. November 17th, Greyhound started to roll. Limited service was begun in 27 states with 4,500 employees, both supervisors and hourly workers on the job.
I really thought it over, and I was nervous about it, but I decided I need to work, and I love being a professional driver, and so I'm back here.
It's rough times are hard, and, you know, people are looking for jobs, and I'm just glad I'm working.
The Phase 1 startup spurred the union to resume negotiations. Counter-proposals were offered by both sides.
The nation's largest bus company warned its striking drivers if they didn't swallow a pay cut and return to work today, the buses would roll with non-union drivers, and roll they did. But there was trouble from coast to coast. In New York, the buses were pelted with eggs and coffee and vindictives. Strikers clashed with police in many cities. Buses were vandalized, rocks and bottles thrown, headlights smashed. In Boston, it was especially rough. One policeman had a leg broken. Another broke a thumb, and 3 or 4 others also were hurt in Boston. There were 50 arrests in Boston, more than 100 nationwide.
Dawn, the first buses began to roll, and the Greyhound strike turned ugly.
I have no idea, really, where they came from. In fact, I haven't looked at the curb. I just got down there a couple hours ago, and I hadn't looked nowhere. Is there nails out there?
On the bus takes their lives in their own hands. We're not responsible for whoever's on those buses.
It sounds like a bomb. Margaret Tippings was correct. The home of her neighbors, the Weigels, was hit with a bomb. A Molotov cocktail, to be precise. The explosive crashed through a window and ripped into the living room, setting fire to the rug and draperies. No one was hurt, but damage was estimated at $2,000. Phyllis Weigel was home with her 2 small children. Her husband, Dave, was away, driving a bus for Greyhound. Mrs. Weigel, who was afraid to be photographed, told of threatening calls and letters they'd received since her husband decided to cross the picket line.
We did not think that it would come to, actual violence.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
From Boston to San Francisco, indeed all over the United States today, there was tension and in some places violence between union workers on strike against Greyhound and non-union drivers who've been hired by the nation's largest bus company to resume at least a limited service. What you're looking at right now behind me is a live picture of one such picket line. That is a picket line in Los Angeles. And standing by live now at the Greyhound bus terminal in downtown LA is James Cushing Murray of the Amalgamated Transit Union. It is his union which is on strike. Why is the violence necessary?
I don't call it violence. I call it sacrifice. Greyhound's the one that inspired whatever violence took place, and Greyhound should take the blame for it.
So what you're saying right now, and what some of your members, and I clearly stress the word some, have been saying to the American public is, if you ride on Greyhound now, you're taking a risk. Not only the risk of non-union drivers, but the risk that we, who are on strike, may take action against you, the public.
Well, there may be that risk indeed.
Well, that's a shocking thing to say, isn't it?
I don't think it's a shocking thing to say. I don't take the blame for it.
It appears that Greyhound workers won't be going back to their jobs anytime soon. Union leaders today announced that 96% of workers voting on a proposed new contract offer from Greyhound have voted against it.
Greyhound responded by stepping up the offensive in a second corporate ad. Under the rejected offer, the average Greyhound driver's $32,238 in salary and benefits would be $12,000 higher than the average policeman's, $10,500 more than the average head nurse, $13,000 more than the firefighters, and $11,000 more than the average earned by high school teachers in this country.
The Greyhound Corporation came back today with the ultimate ultimatum to its striking employees. With you or without you, we're going to run our bus company. Greyhound officials in Phoenix said the rejection yesterday of its latest and final contract offer gave them no alternative but to proceed with plans to resume full operations. And Greyhound Chairman John Teets said there remains little hope for a negotiated settlement with the union and its 12,700 drivers and other workers.
Because this is the best we can do. This is our wage package for us to compete. If we settle for anything less, long-term, Greyhound Lines cannot exist in a competitive marketplace. So you reach a position that this is the way we must operate. That contract, though, is available to them at the time they want to come back to work and sign it. Do we want a contract with ATU? Yes. We made a fair offer. Are we trying to break the ATU? No. The union is misleading our employees, telling them that their jobs are secure. They are not. And those jobs will not be there in some distant future date when the union suddenly realizes that the competitive situation is real and critical and deserves addressing today.
The Greyhound strike made the nation's editorial pages this week. The Augusta Chronicle in Georgia said that Greyhound had to act as it did in order to survive. Greyhound had only one choice in the face of strikers who were making demands which could have destroyed their employer's ability to compete.
As the tide of public opinion continued to mount against the ATU, union credibility came under fire. Union negotiators, frustrated and unable to negotiate a settlement, sought assistance from the international ATU leadership, which in turn looked for help to federal mediators and other unions, including the AFL-CIO.
It's finally final tonight. Greyhound strikers have voted 74% in favor of a 3-year contract. That ends a 7-week strike against the nation's largest bus line. Full operations are expected by Christmas. The contract contains wage cuts of 7.8% and a 4% employee contribution to the pension plan.
Someplace along the line you have to realize the economic realities. You have to realize the position or the stance that the company was taking. It was hardball, and the ball was mostly in their court.
We've shown perhaps that the ability to operate during a strike can be done if the will is there.
Nationwide service resumed at midnight, December 21st. 4,000 buses rolled during the next 24 hours. The acceptance of Greyhound's proposal by the union leaders came a scant 1 day before the company was to begin hiring Phase 2's 3,500 additional replacement workers. According to John Teets, had these replacements come on board, the die would have been cast. On the morning after full service resumed, the Arizona Republic editorial read as follows. If members of the Greyhound Bus Lines unions had taken the time to simply keep abreast of what is happening in the deregulated transportation industry, they probably would not have engaged in the idiotic 47-day strike that they just ended. Instead, they would have realized that Greyhound management had leveled with them about the realities of running a bus company in a competitive, deregulated environment. And they would have realized, furthermore, that they were being misled by their union leaders. They can place the blame for this with union leaders who stridently implied that Greyhound could not be believed and that preserving union solidarity required the sacrifice of a strike. Union leaders may talk tough, but that's not the same as talking sense.